Louise Ellis was born on June 23, 1948 in Ottawa, Canada. She was known as a talented writer, illustrator, and freelance journalist, and was drawn to stories of injustice, always seeking truth in the lives of others. Unfortunately, her life would turn into a nightmare after meeting and falling in love with a prisoner by the name of Brett Morgan. In 1992, she began covering the case of David Milgaard, who was wrongfully convicted for the murder of Gail Miller. The real killer was Larry Fisher, and his cellmate and the one testifying against him was Brett. When Louise heard Brett's testimony, she felt he was a changed man and saw his life as a story of redemption. She then decided to reach out to him. Through letters and visits, she fell for his carefully crafted persona. When he was released, she welcomed him into her home. But it wouldn't be long before his welcome was very worn out. In her diary, Louise documented their fights, the way Brett poured beer over her head in fits of rage, and how he punched a hole through a door. By January 1995, she had asked him to leave, but after a break-in at her home, she allowed him to briefly return. She then discovered that Brett had stolen over $12,000 from her personal accounts. Brett had a history of manipulation and violence. His first wife, Sandra, who had gotten pregnant, believed she was marrying an 18-year-old man, but Brett had lied and was only 15. Their relationship quickly turned into a nightmare of control and cruelty. Sandra endured suffocation, brutal beatings, and a miscarriage caused by his fist. When she finally gathered the courage to escape, Brett assaulted her one last time, gun in hand. Thankfully, she made it out alive, but just barely. His second wife, Christine, met him in 1975. At first, he seemed charming, but the facade crumbled when she uncovered his lies about their finances. She tried to leave, but Brett lashed out, choking her on the side of the road. She managed to flee and later divorced him, but his evil side only worsened. In 1978, his violence turned deadly. He lured 21-year-old Gwen Telford into a hotel room, where he strangled her to death. Though convicted of manslaughter, he was back on the streets in a mere 10 years. By then, he had a lengthy criminal record consisting of fraud, theft, and breaking and entering. Unfortunately, once Louise made the decision to confront Brett about the stolen money, her fate was sealed. On April 22, 1995, 46-year-old Louise vanished from her home in Ottawa. 2 days later, Louise's car was found with her purse and overnight bag locked inside. Played the concerned partner, making emotional pleas to the media and organizing search parties. At some point, a woman named Marie Parent, who was studying to be a private detective, decided to look into Louise's case as a final assignment. She spoke with Brett and began noticing some inconsistencies in his story and started suspecting him of being involved. The more she helped him, the more she gained his trust. Then on July 5th, police instructed Marie to get Brett out of the house so they could plant a wire in his truck. So she took him to a restaurant to eat, and while there he began making advancements toward her. After arriving back at Morgan's home, they agreed to meet the following day to continue the search for Louise. That search took them to the woods near Sainte-Cécile-d'Amicham, Quebec. While out walking, Marie noticed something just 30 feet away. She pointed it out and Brett immediately said, "That's Louise." How did he know? When questioned, he claimed to have seen her running shoe. It was the slip-up investigators had been waiting for. That same day, Brett Morgan was arrested for her murder. Investigators believe that on the night of April 22, 1995, Louise had planned to visit an ex-boyfriend to celebrate his daughter's birthday. Investigators believe she confronted Brett about the stolen money late that night. Enraged, he attacked her, suffocating her in the bathroom of her own home. He then wrapped her lifeless body in a shower curtain, drove her deep into the Quebec wilderness, and left her among the trees. To cover his tracks, he dumped her body near her ex-boyfriend's home in an attempt to frame him. His trial in the fall of 1997 lasted 6 months and had over 90 witnesses testify. In the end, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. However, his stay was short because he died 2 months later from hepatitis C. Investigators still believe he is a prime suspect in the murder of two young women who were found in a remote area outside of Edmonton, strangled to death. February 14, 2025, police were called to an apartment to perform a welfare check after the landlord raised concerns about the lack of communication since December and missed rent since October. When authorities entered the home, they found 3 children, a 15-year-old boy and 2 girls ages 12 and 13 living in unimaginable filth. The boy had been sleeping on a mattress on the floor while his sister slept on pizza boxes. The conditions were so horrific that police evidence technicians had to wear hazmat suits to process the scene. The next part is going to truly shock you. It turns out that their mother, 34-year-old Kelly Marie Bryant, had abandoned the kids at the home 4 or 5 years ago, and they were only able to survive because of a weekly food drop-off by Kelly and sometimes an unidentified stranger. The home had no running water and trash was stacked 4 feet high. That trash consisted of mold and human waste. The bathroom also had serious issues. The toilet was overflowing and there was feces in the bathtub. The children were so neglected that their toenails had curled under their feet, making it painful to walk. They also hadn't attended school since their abandonment, lacking essential hygiene products, and were found wearing soiled clothing. The girls, in particular, showed signs of not having left the home in years and appeared unfamiliar with personal hygiene practices, including how to flush a toilet. They passed the time by watching television and playing games. Unfortunately, they went largely unnoticed due to the no-contact delivery service during the pandemic. Since they never came outside, neighbors had no clue children even lived there. Once investigators located Kelly, they took her into custody and charged her with 3 counts of first-degree child abuse. Due to the severity of the case, the judge set her bond at $250 million. Meanwhile, the kids were taken to the hospital for evaluation and have since been placed in the custody of a relative. Kelly's next court appearance is scheduled for March 4, 2025. As of now, she remains in jail and is facing life in prison if convicted. Shirley May Merritt was born on September 27, 1941 in Clark County, Mississippi. She later became a devoted mother and grandmother and was known for her kindness that knew no bounds. At 77 years old, she had spent years supporting her family, never realizing that the son she had fought so hard to protect would be the one to betray her in the most horrifying way. To outsiders, the Merritt family seemed perfect. But behind closed doors, there was tension. Richard Merritt had always been a master manipulator, a fact even his own brother acknowledged. During his childhood, Richard lived a life of luxury in Saudi Arabia with his parents, Shirley and Robert Sr., after his father retired from the military and took on a lucrative job as a defense contractor. His older brother Robert Jr., who was in graduate school at the time, recalls that this period made a lasting impression on Richard, who became obsessed with wealth and status. When Richard moved back to the U.S. for school, he lived with Robert Jr. in Atlanta. Even then, Robert described his younger brother as entitled and lazy, treating him as his personal cook and chauffeur. Richard went on to study law, struggling at first to pass the bar exam, failing multiple times before finally succeeding. He married his college sweetheart, but Robert Jr. claims Richard's ambitions were never about justice or helping others. He only wanted money, power, and the high life. After building a legal career, Richard worked for the Georgia Attorney General's office and several law firms before opening his own practice in 2010. By then, he was married with 2 children and living in Smyrna, Georgia, presenting himself as a successful, respected attorney. But in 2017, the illusion of success crumbled when he was sued for fraud. Richard had settled a lawsuit for 2 sisters without their knowledge and pocketed their $70,000 settlement. That discovery led to a deeper investigation, revealing that he had stolen over $450,000 from at least 17 victims, many of whom were elderly. He then lost his law license, his career, and his family. His wife filed for divorce and sought full custody of their children. Despite the severity of his crimes, Shirley remained devoted to her son. She paid his legal fees, bailed him out of jail, and even convinced authorities to let him live with her while awaiting trial. She believed she could protect and help him, but her unwavering support would prove to be a fatal mistake. In January 2019, Richard pleaded guilty to multiple counts of theft, forgery, and elder abuse, receiving a 15-year prison sentence. The judge granted him 2 weeks to get his affairs in order before reporting to prison under the condition that he wear an ankle monitor and remain at Shirley's home in DeKalb County. When the day of his surrender arrived, Richard didn't turn himself in. Investigators later discovered his ankle monitor had been cut off and tossed in a trash can at a gas station. Authorities issued an alert, but it was already too late. The next day, February 2, 2019, Shirley was found murdered in her home. She had been stabbed so violently that the knife handle broke, leaving the blade embedded in her face. Nearby, a 35-pound barbell, covered in blood and hair, lay on the floor. It was a brutal and senseless killing. Authorities immediately suspected Richard, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. Shirley had been cooking Richard a last meal of spaghetti before he was supposed to leave for prison. The table was still set for two, food was left simmering on the stove, and a knife was missing from the kitchen block, the same knife used in the murder. There were no signs of forced entry and no sign of a struggle. The only things missing from the home were Shirley's car and cell phone. For the next 8 months, Richard evaded capture. He changed his identity, adopting the name Mick Malvo, and started a new life in Nashville, Tennessee. He even found a job and a new girlfriend through a dating app. But in September 2019, his downfall began when he parked his mother's car with a fake license plate at Vanderbilt University, where police quickly discovered it. Investigators searched the car and found a fake Louisiana ID with Richard's face, as well as receipts that allowed authorities to track his movements. He was then arrested without incident and charged with his mother's murder. All the while, Richard maintained his innocence. At trial, he claimed that 2 armed men had stormed the house, killed his mother in front of him, threatened his family, and then let him go. He never told this story to law enforcement, only unveiling it for the first time when he took the stand in his own defense. The jury wasn't convinced. During the trial, another strange detail emerged. Shirley, Richard's ex-wife, and his former attorney had all received anonymous hand-drawn cartoons depicting a courtroom scene. Some of the drawings featured Disney's Huey, Dewey, and Louie in a rowboat, while others made vile threats about the justice system. Richard's former attorney testified that he believed Richard created the drawings himself. While the exact idea behind the drawings remains a mystery, some believe he was trying to pass them off as coming from someone that was threatening him and his family. It's a really strange part of the case that, I'll be honest, I don't fully understand, and I don't think anyone does. Richard's DNA and fingerprints were never found at the crime scene, which his defense team used to argue reasonable doubt. But prosecutors countered that he lived in the home and had plenty of time to clean up. Surveillance footage placed him driving Shirley's car after the murder. Location data from Shirley's phone placed it in the same area where Richard had removed his ankle monitor. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Richard Merritt was convicted of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a weapon during a felony. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus 5 additional years. After his conviction, Richard filed an appeal claiming he had received ineffective legal representation. He argued that his trial attorney should have objected when his ex-wife testified about a past domestic violence incident and should have called additional witnesses to support his claims. The judge denied his request for a new trial, ruling that none of his arguments would have changed the outcome. Even if Richard were somehow acquitted of murder, he still faced a 30-year sentence in Cobb County for fraud and elder abuse. His brother, Robert Jr., had no sympathy for him. He believes Richard manipulated their mother for years, using her for money, bullying her into submission, and ultimately taking her life when she was no longer useful to him, and he feels his brother is where he deserves to be. February 13, 2009, Frank Garcia, a nursing supervisor, learned that he had been fired from Lakeside Memorial Hospital in Brockport, New York, following accusations of sexual harassment from 2 coworkers. This wasn't Garcia's first dismissal. He had also been fired from Wesley Gardens nursing home in Rochester after similar allegations. However, this time, the firing would send Frank Garcia to a very dark place and lead to a horrible tragedy. In the early hours of Valentine's Day, February 14, 2009, at around 5 a.m., outside Lakeside Memorial Hospital, 23-year-old certified nursing assistant Mary Silliman walked out to the parking lot to smoke a cigarette. As she was standing there, Garcia approached and began assaulting her. A good Samaritan, who went by Randy, saw the ordeal and decided to intervene. Unfortunately, that was a big mistake because Garcia was equipped with a .40 caliber Glock. After shooting Randy, he turned the gun on Randy's girlfriend, Audra Dillon, wounding her in the arm as she fled. Before Garcia left the scene, he sadly executed Mary. He then drove 50 miles east to Canandaigua and began going door to door along Middle Cheshire Road until he located the home of Kimberly Glatz and her husband, Christopher. Once there, he forced his way inside and then held the couple and their 2 teenage children captive for 3 hours. During that time, he forced Christopher to write farewell notes to his loved ones before ordering both adults to lie down. He then shot them execution-style in the back of the head while their terrified children remained upstairs. Before leaving, Garcia taunted the children, forcing them to thank him for sparing their lives. Investigators would soon learn that Mary Silliman and Kimberly Glatz were the 2 individuals who accused him of sexual harassment. Due to the harassment complaint, Kimberly had received $25,000 as compensation. This angered Garcia, and while holding the couple hostage, he demanded that amount but would never get it. Upon leaving the scene, he took Christopher's cell phone and called his wife Marjan Garcia and told her to watch the news and confess to having hurt someone, though he did not elaborate. Later that day, Garcia surrendered to police at a Tim Hortons in Rochester, still carrying the .40 caliber Glock used in the killings. Ballistics confirmed the weapon was used in the murders. Despite his defense team's claims of insufficient evidence, forensic analysis and eyewitness testimonies tied Garcia directly to the murders. In 2010, Garcia was convicted of first-degree murder for the killings of Kimberly and Christopher Glatz and received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with 2 additional 25-year sentences for the kidnapping of the couple's teenage children. In Monroe County, he was also convicted of 2 additional murders for the deaths of Mary Silliman and Randall Norman, as well as the attempted murder of Audra Dillon. In 2017, an appellate court vacated Garcia's life sentence related to the attempted murder charge, but upheld his other convictions. His sentence for the killings of the Glatz couple was later modified from consecutive life sentences to concurrent life terms. Regardless, remains incarcerated at Attica Correctional Facility. Throughout the investigation, police discovered Garcia's pattern of predatory behavior, which included prior allegations of harassment at multiple healthcare facilities. Investigators concluded that Garcia's violent rampage stemmed from a desire for revenge against those who had exposed his misconduct. Despite his heinous crimes, Garcia never expressed remorse for his actions, and judges across multiple trials described him as a dangerous and disturbing psychopath who should never be released. Wayman Keith Gentry was born on September 2, 1974 in Waco, Texas to Wayman and Glenda and went by Keith. Keith grew up in Robinson, Texas and later married Darlene Dasjacil on April 10, 1999, and they went on to have 3 sons. A devoted husband, father, son and friend, Keith was well loved by those who knew him. Keith, a corrections officer, and Darlene, a nurse, seemed to have an idyllic life. That is until a horrible tragedy occurred just 6 years into the marriage. On the morning of November 9, 2005, at 6:11 a.m., Darlene called 911 to report that Keith had been shot in their home after an intruder broke in. When police arrived, they found Keith in the bedroom, barely alive, suffering from a gunshot wound to the head. He was rushed to the hospital, but later succumbed to his injuries. The moment police arrived on the scene, they noticed inconsistencies in Darlene's account. First of all, she was a nurse and had made no attempt to help Keith. There was also the matter of the break-in, but investigators could find no signs of forced entry. They also found it strange that Keith's guns were initially missing, but later found on the front lawn neatly stacked in a pile, except for one, a .22 caliber revolver. When Darlene was questioned about surviving the attack, she told investigators. She had been asleep with her children in a different room when the intruder entered the home. At that point, they began digging into Keith and Darlene's relationship and discovered that their marriage was far from perfect. Friends of the couple told investigators that tensions in the marriage had been on the rise due to their financial struggles. They also discovered that Darlene stood to gain $500,000 from Keith's life insurance policy. At this point, they put Darlene on the suspect list and began surveilling her. That's when they caught her discarding a blood-stained pillowcase in a dumpster days after the murder. Then came the most damning evidence of all when police discovered that Darlene had taken an interest in purchasing a piece of property with a pond on it. She had initially wanted the property so the children could fish, but after buying it, she abruptly requested the pond be filled in. Suspicious, authorities searched the pond and unbeknownst to Darlene, they found Keith's missing .22 caliber revolver. They then set up surveillance on the pond and witnessed Darlene return, wade into the water, and search the exact spot where the gun had been found. She was then arrested and charged with Keith's murder. In the end, she was found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison with eligibility for parole in 2037. Following her conviction, Keith's parents were granted custody of the couple's 3 sons. Then, in 2010, a court prohibited Darlene from any contact with them. Since the case largely rested on circumstantial evidence, inconsistencies in her story, and the pond video, some believe she is innocent or that her guilt was not proven beyond a reasonable doubt. What do y'all think? Let me know in the comments below. Shannon Gill Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in Nacogdoches, Texas. She later moved with her family from Louisiana to Tennessee in 1997 and then graduated from Farragut High School in 2003. She then enrolled at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, majoring in sociology. She loved golf and had a bright future ahead. Instead of enjoying dorm life, she remained at home to save money and worked 2 part-time jobs while taking on a full class schedule. In 2007, she met and fell in love with Chris Newsom. Chris was born on September 21, 1983, and was local to Knoxville. Before college, he had been a standout baseball player at Hawes High School. After graduating in 2002, he attended Pellissippi State Community College and worked as a carpenter. He was described by his father Hugh as a talented craftsman whose crown molding remains in homes throughout the city of Knoxville. Unfortunately, on Saturday night, January 6, 2007, the worst imaginable nightmare would befall both Shannon and Chris. Chris had originally planned to play golf with friends, but changed his mind to spend the evening with Shannon. They planned to watch a movie and then attend a party. Shannon was hanging out at her friend Kara Soward's apartment in the Washington Ridge apartment complex in North Knoxville, where Chris planned to pick them up and take them to a party. However, at 7:30 p.m., Chris called and said he was running late, but said he would be there in about 30 minutes. So Shannon told Kara to go on ahead and they wouldn't be too far behind. At 8 p.m., Kara left to go on ahead to the party. At 8:47 p.m., Chris withdrew $100 from his bank account at an ATM in the Halls area. At 9 p.m., Chris dropped off his friend, Josh, at the party and told him and other friends there that he was going to get Shannon and they were going out to eat and would join the party later. Kara then called Shannon and told her that Chris was on his way, which was about a 10-minute drive from the party to the Washington Ridge apartments. Unfortunately, that was the last time they ever heard from Shannon or Chris. By 10 p.m., when Chris and Shannon had not arrived at the party, their friends called and texted them, but received no response. Around 1 a.m., 2 of Chris's friends went to the Washington Ridge apartments in search of him and discovered that his truck was in the parking lot. But Shannon's 2005 Toyota 4Runner was missing. Unbeknownst to everyone, Shannon and Chris had been carjacked and abducted from the parking lot of the Washington Ridge apartment complex. Between 9:10 p.m. and 11 p.m., never to be seen alive again. The following morning, Shannon's boss called and said she had failed to show up for work. At that point, her mother, Dina, knew something was wrong. So they called Chris's parents, and to their shock, they hadn't heard from them either. They then called Kara to find out if Shannon ever arrived back at the apartment. But she hadn't. Kara told them that Chris's truck was still in the parking lot, but there was no sign of Shannon's Toyota 4Runner. Both sets of parents began calling hospitals and jails, trying to track down the couple, but there was no sign of them anywhere. They then tried to report them missing, but since it was a college town and it had only been 12 hours, police figured they were just shacked up somewhere. Sadly, they couldn't have been more wrong. The detective told them that they needed to keep looking for the couple themselves. So Shannon's father, Gary, called the phone company and asked them to ping her phone, and it traced to an area on Cherry Street. If you are from Knoxville or have lived there for any time, you know this is not a good area to be in. It's a very seedy part of town, and most locals stay far away. It's definitely not a place that two college students would willingly go, especially at night. Once they had that information, Gary and a group of searchers headed to Cherry Street to look for the couple. Together with an off-duty officer friend of Gary's, they organized a search from a gas station on Cherry Street. Even though the searchers were scared to death, considering it was now nighttime in a very bad neighborhood, they trudged on. As Gary arrived at the corner of Chipman Street and Glider Avenue, he saw his daughter's 4Runner and immediately called the police and his off-duty friend. Within minutes, multiple cop cars were on the scene. Inside Shannon's vehicle, many of her items, including her purse, was missing. But one thing that stood out was that the driver's seat had been pushed back all the way and leaned back. This was a telltale sign that someone else had been driving her vehicle. But who? However, once again, Knoxville police don't treat this as an endangered missing person case and instead treated it as an abandoned vehicle. The 4Runner was then impounded and the parents of Shannon and Chris were told to go home and get some sleep and wait for the kids to call them. It's a frustrating response from police, but they, like most people in this relatively safe city, have no clue to the horrors that await. On Monday morning, January 8, 2007, less than 100 yards from where Shannon's vehicle was found, a passing train engineer saw what appeared to be human remains smoldering on the side of the tracks. When investigators arrived, they sadly find Chris's nude remains with burns over 80% of his body. He had also been bound, gagged, and shot 3 times. Once the news of Chris's murder spread around the community, panic set in about Shannon's whereabouts. Law enforcement also realized at that point that they had seriously screwed up and needed to find Shannon quickly and locate the individuals who were responsible. Both family and the searchers from the previous night headed back to Cherry Street and began a massive search for Shannon. Meanwhile, forensic technicians began processing the 4Runner for fingerprints, and while most of the vehicle was wiped clean, they were able to obtain one thumbprint on an envelope in the back seat. When they ran the print through the database, it came back to an ex-con named Lamarcus Davidson, who had just got out of prison a few months prior. Davidson wasn't a Knoxville native, but was known across the state for his long criminal history, which included drug dealing, aggravated robbery, and his most recent crime, carjacking. They contacted his parole officer and learned that he lived a few blocks away from where Shannon's car was found at 2316 Chipman Street. They raided the home, but Davidson wasn't there. As they searched the home, they made a gruesome discovery. Inside a large plastic trash can, sitting in the corner of the home, were the remains of Shannon. Her hands were tied, and she apparently had suffocated to death inside the trash can. An autopsy would reveal that both Shannon and Chris had been sexually assaulted by multiple people repeatedly and violently for hours. They had essentially been tortured. Now police desperately needed to find the suspect or suspects. They were able to learn that the house was being leased by Lamarcus Davidson and a 22-year-old woman named Daphne Sutton. Daphne had been in a sexual relationship with Davidson since he showed up in town. Daphne was brought in for questioning, but insisted she knew nothing about the murders, saying she had moved out of the house several days earlier. She told investigators she had been involved with another man at the time of the murders and her alibi checked out. However, she did give investigators a good lead. She told them that Davidson had a crew of thugs from Kentucky and had been terrorizing Cherry Street for the past few days. Those individuals were George Thomas, Latavis Cobbins, and Vanessa Coleman. Together, they had been committing multiple home invasions and robbed 2 restaurants. Investigators were eventually able to locate Davidson in an abandoned house not far from the crime scene. Once in custody, they searched the home and found Chris's tennis shoes. Davidson was taken back to the police station and questioned by detectives, but denied involvement in the crime. Meanwhile, authorities were trying to track down the other suspects using DVDs that were found at the crime scene and were overdue from a library in Kentucky. They were able to get a potential address of where the suspects might be. When they raided that home in Lebanon, Kentucky, they surprisingly found all three individuals, George Thomas, Latavius Cobbins, and Vanessa Coleman. Also inside, they found Shannon's perfume, wallet, and purse. All three were brought back to Knoxville and questioned, but just like Davidson denied involvement. However, investigators had more than enough evidence, including Davidson's fingerprints on the trash bag that Shannon was found in, Vanessa Coleman's DNA on the sheets used to bind Shannon, George Thomas's gun matched the ballistics from the bullets found in Chris's body, and DNA from both Davidson and Cobbins were recovered from Shannon using a sexual assault kit. A fifth individual by the name of Eric Boyd was also arrested and charged with accessory to murder. Once the group of individuals realized they were not getting away with these murders scot-free, they began turning on each other. Cobbins put the blame on Davidson, while Davidson put the blame on everyone else. However, during this process, investigators were able to piece together the events of the night. On the night of the murders, Davidson and his crew were driving around Knoxville looking for a car to jack to use in another robbery. That's when they pulled into the Washington Ridge apartment complex and spotted Shannon's new 2005 Toyota 4Runner that her parents had bought her. Unfortunately, they caught Chris and Shannon off guard, standing outside the vehicle kissing. At gunpoint, they threw them in the back of the 4Runner and drove to Davidson's rental home on Chipman Street, where they put Shannon and Chris through the most horrible ordeal a person could imagine. In the end, Lamarcus Davidson, the ringleader, was convicted of multiple counts, including first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Latavius Cobbins, Davidson's half-brother, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. George Thomas, an accomplice, was initially sentenced to life without parole, but later resentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman was convicted of facilitation of the crimes and originally sentenced to 53 years, later reduced to 35 years. She was denied parole in 2014 and again in 2020. She will not be eligible again until 2030. Eric Boyd was originally convicted on federal charges as an accessory, but was later indicted in 2018 for first-degree felony murder. In 2019, he was sentenced to consecutive life terms. Unfortunately, their trials were initially marred by controversy when Judge Richard Baumgartner, who presided over the cases, was found guilty of official misconduct due to his drug addiction. This led to retrials for Thomas and Coleman, though Davidson's and Cobbins remained upheld. In addition to being addicted to opiates and purchasing prescription drugs from felons, Baumgartner was also accused of engaging in sexual relationships and trading legal favors for sex. One of the most notable allegations was that he had a relationship with Dina Castleman, a drug court graduate and repeat offender whom he helped avoid jail time. Reports indicated that Baumgartner engaged in sex acts inside the courthouse during court hours and used his position to provide legal leniency in exchange for these encounters. His misconduct ultimately led to his resignation in March 2011 and a guilty plea for official misconduct. He was later disbarred and convicted on federal charges related to his corruption. Baumgartner died in 2018 at age 70, leaving behind one of the most infamous cases of judicial corruption in Tennessee history. Following the murders, both families established scholarships in their children's names. Waste Connections, a national garbage company, purchased and demolished the house on Chipman Street in 2008, creating a memorial for Shannon and Chris. 2 Tennessee acts also came out of this case. The first one was the Chris Newsom Act, which eliminated the requirement for a judge to approve a jury's unanimous verdict. The hope behind this act was that it would cut down on retrials like the ones that occurred in this case. The second was the Shannon Christian Act, which prevents evidence or allegations of previous behavior that could call into question the character of a victim, defendant, witness, or third party. This was passed in order to prevent attorneys and defendants in attempting to portray a victim in a negative light, such as making allegations about their behavior. During the trial, Davidson had alleged that his victims had come to his house to buy drugs. The defense also attacked Shannon's character. However, Due to already established laws, prosecutors were not allowed to inform the jury of Davidson's previous carjacking conviction. To this day, Chris and Shannon's families continue to fight for justice and honor their memories, ensuring that they will never be forgotten. On December 14, 2005, emergency responders discovered a burning red 2003 Jaguar on the outskirts of Las Vegas. In the trunk, they found the charred body of a woman, her head completely encased in duct tape with a fabric ligature around her neck. The body was sent to the medical examiner while investigators traced the car's registration to 33-year-old Kelly Ryan. Police then went in search of Kelly and found her at home alive with her husband, 39-year-old Craig Titus, a professional bodybuilder. In 1996, he became a bodybuilding champion and Mr. Olympia competitor, while Kelly was a past Fitness America and Fitness International winner. Kelly claimed their 28-year-old live-in assistant, Melissa James, had taken the car. The couple alleged Melissa had been using drugs and stealing from them. According to them, they had parted ways with Melissa on December 12th. She had been staying at a motel before planning to return home. However, an autopsy revealed that Melissa had no smoke in her lungs, meaning she was dead before the car was set fire. Her system contained a lethal dose of morphine and strangulation was suspected, though the exact cause of death remained undetermined. Detectives officially confirmed the body belonged to Melissa using DNA provided by her mother. Melissa was born on March 23, 1977, and grew up in Panama City, Florida. She was an intelligent student, graduating early from A. Crawford Mosley High School in 1994. From a young age, she was passionate about dance, taking lessons at age 7, and eventually becoming a cheerleader. She attended Gulf Coast Community College for Business Administration, but left before completing her degree to pursue her dream of opening a dance studio. At just 19, she established her own studio where she choreographed routines and provided scholarships for underprivileged children and students with special needs. Melissa also worked as a model, appearing in promotional campaigns for Calvin Klein, Hawaiian Tropics, and Gotcha clothing. She did commercial work for local television, appeared on MTV, and spent a year as an arena football cheerleader. She met Craig Titus in 1996 in Panama City through a mutual friend, and they quickly became close. Years later, in 2003, when Craig and Kelly moved to Las Vegas, Melissa joined them to work as a personal trainer at a gym Craig managed. When things didn't work out, she returned to Florida, but later moved back to Vegas in October 2005 at their request to assist with their new clothing line, Ice Gear. Craig first noticed his wife Kelly Ryan in 1995 at a fitness show, but hesitated to approach her. He later admitted he had been intimidated by her reputation as a daddy's girl. Kelly initially resisted Craig's advances due to his well-known womanizing reputation, but he persisted. In 1999, he convinced her to spend time with him as friends. Just over a year later, they exchanged vows at the Little White Chapel in Las Vegas. The couple moved to Venice Beach, California before returning to Vegas in 2002, where they purchased a home at the foot of the Red Rock Mountains. Together, they lived an intense lifestyle, training, competing, partying, and abusing drugs. While Craig was always known for his reckless nature, Kelly underwent a dramatic transformation, altering her appearance with plastic surgery and developing a more volatile personality. Brands noted that she changed, not just in reputation and looks, but in character. By 2005, their relationship had become a toxic cycle of drug use, steroid abuse, and infidelity. While their monogamy-free relationship was public knowledge, only those close to them knew the full extent of their self-destructive behavior in the months leading up to Melissa's murder. Investigators uncovered tension in the household with rumors of a romantic relationship between Melissa and Craig. There were also suggestions that she had participated in threesomes with the couple, fueling jealousy and resentment. Melissa had also planned to leave Vegas permanently and was set to fly home to New Jersey on December 13th at 10:30 p.m., a flight she never made. On December 17th, a friend of Kelly's contacted the police and revealed that Kelly had confided in her about the night of Melissa's death. According to Kelly, Melissa had threatened her with a taser during an argument, but Kelly gained control and used it on Melissa. She said Craig, then intervened, body slamming and choking Melissa. Police later found taser confetti at the couple's home, confirming that a taser had been fired 5 times on December 13th at 2:10 p.m. Investigators examined Craig's phone records and linked him to Anthony Gross, a bodybuilding associate. Gross admitted meeting the couple at a gas station in the early hours of December 14th, where he said they filled up gas cans. Surveillance footage later showed Kelly using Melissa's credit card at a Walmart near their home to purchase 7 bottles of lighter fluid. Around the same time, Gross was caught on nearby security footage. On December 19th, detectives obtained Shell station surveillance footage from the morning of December 14th. It captured a charcoal gray pickup truck followed by a red Jaguar pulling into the parking lot of the gas station at 4:12 a.m. Gross initially lied to detectives, claiming he went to the Shell station straight from his apartment. However, additional footage from a Green Valley grocer near Walmart proved otherwise. Investigators later stated that while Gross's involvement was evident, he felt sympathy for Gross's parents who were devastated by their son's actions. On December 21st, police returned to the couple's home and found it abandoned. A manhunt ensued, and ended on December 23rd when Craig and Kelly were arrested outside Boston in Stoughton, Massachusetts. Despite denying involvement, a witness later told investigators that Craig admitted to tasering Melissa and pouring morphine down her throat. Craig had a prior drug history, serving 2 years in federal prison for selling ecstasy in 1995. His probation was revoked after testing positive for steroids, and he was once again released in 1999. Friends later told police that both Craig and Kelly used OxyContin, and witnesses testified that Craig once purchased $500 worth of morphine. Initially, the couple claimed that Melissa died of an overdose and that they panicked, burned her body, and fled, fearing that publicity about her death would ruin their careers. However, investigators had overwhelming evidence, and in May of 2006, Craig pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 21 to 55 years in prison. Kelly pleaded guilty to arson and entered an Alford plea for battery with a deadly weapon, receiving 2 consecutive terms of 3 to 13 years. She was paroled in 2017. Gross, who assisted in disposing of the body, received a probationary sentence. Shortly after Kelly was convicted, her mother, 61-year-old Nikki Ryan, suffered a fatal heart attack while showing her home in Laguna Niguel, California to a real estate agent. A cardiac technician at a sports and wellness center, Nikki had traveled back and forth to Las Vegas trying to sell Kelly and Craig's home to help cover legal fees. According to a former coworker, Nikki had been under extreme stress from her daughter's crimes and sentencing, ultimately dying of a broken heart. Kelly later filed for divorce from Craig while in prison, finalizing it in December 2009. Melissa had trusted Craig and Kelly as friends, but instead she was betrayed and murdered. Her dreams of reopening a dance studio and continuing her passion for helping children were cut short in a crime fueled by jealousy, control, and violence. Shaylin Loano Stone was born in September 2006 in Hilo, Hawaii. Sadly, she lived a very short life that was marred by constant abuse, neglect, and systemic failures by child welfare authorities. Early on, Shaylin was removed from her parents, Kevin Loano and Tiffany Stone, due to allegations of abuse and neglect and placed in foster care. This intervention followed concerns about the well-being of her brother, who was also placed in foster care for similar reasons. In May 2008, the system unfortunately returned Shaylin to her parents. Just a few months later, Child Welfare Services received reports of physical abuse, neglect, and threats from her mother. However, officials closed the investigation without confirming the allegations. In January 2009, concerns resurfaced when Shaylin exhibited signs of failure to thrive. After significant weight loss over 2 years, once again she was placed in foster care. Despite repeated warnings, confirmed threats of abuse, and continued evidence of neglect, the state reunited Shaylin with her parents in 2011. Within a month, Tiffany claimed she could no longer care for Shaylin and transferred custody to her own mother, Henrietta Stom. In 2014, another report of concern was filed about the adults involved in Shaylin's life, but authorities assessed the risk as moderate and referred the family for voluntary case management instead of opening a formal investigation. In 2015, Henrietta Stone filed paperwork to homeschool Charlene, effectively removing her from any oversight by school authorities. By November of that year, Charlene was pulled out of Hallow Union Elementary School, and it is believed that she was last seen alive by other family members around Thanksgiving of that year. On June 28, 2016, emergency responders were called to the Stone household in Hilo, where they found Shaylin unconscious, emaciated, and weighing just 45 pounds at 53 inches tall. The average weight for a girl that age is 70 pounds with normal healthy averages between 53 and 102. She was transported to Hollow Medical Center where she sadly died a few hours later. Her death certificate listed malnutrition as the primary cause of death, with acute pneumonia and a severe kidney infection contributing to her passing. Investigations revealed a harrowing pattern of abuse, including physical and medical neglect, psychological abuse, and starvation by her parents and grandmother. Prosecutors found that Shaylin had been denied food, water, and medical care for nearly a year before her death. The refrigerator in the household even had alarms installed to prevent her from accessing food. In 2017, all three adults, Tiffany Stone, Kevin Lujano, and Henrietta Stone, were arrested and charged with second-degree murder. In the end, they pleaded no contest to manslaughter. Despite the gravity of their crimes, the sentences handed down were shockingly lenient. Her so-called parents each received 10 years of probation and 2 years in jail. Henrietta, the so-called grandmother who had custody of Shaylin at the time of her death, was sentenced to 10 years of probation and was credited for the time she had already served in custody from 2017 to 2024. Despite overwhelming evidence of abuse, neglect, and failure by the state's child welfare system, no further accountability was imposed on the agencies responsible for Shaylin's protection. Her siblings, who were also placed in foster care, are now suing the state for unspecified damages, alleging that the system's negligence contributed to their sister's tragic death. Shaylin was repeatedly returned to a dangerous environment despite clear signs of abuse, ultimately leading to her slow and painful death at the hands of those who were supposed to protect her. Skylar Annette Neese was born on February 10, 1996, as the sole child of Dave and Mary Neese. At 16, she lived in Star City, West Virginia, and was an honor student at University High School in Monongalia County, pursuing a career in criminal defense while working evenings at Wendy's. On July 5, 2012, after completing her shift at Wendy's, Skylar returned to her family's apartment. When everyone awoke the next morning, Skylar was gone and never seen alive again. After being reported missing, investigators got to work trying to locate her. They found surveillance footage which revealed that she snuck out around 12:30 a.m. and got into a light-colored car. Initially, the identities of the car's occupants remained unknown, but by the fall of 2012, investigators confirmed that the sedan belonged to Sheila Eddy, a close friend of Skylar's. Sheila was questioned by police, but claimed she dropped Skylar back off at home an hour later. Skylar's father, Dave Neese, noted that she had left behind her cell phone charger, contact lenses, and solution, which indicated her intention to return home, but she never did. Initially, law enforcement classified Skylar as a runaway, which delayed an Amber Alert since she was not considered to be in immediate danger. Early tips placed her in North Carolina, but the sightings were false. Meanwhile, her parents posted missing person flyers throughout Monongalia County with the help of Skylar's best friends, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schuff. On September 10, 2012, the FBI and West Virginia State Police joined the search for Skylar and began interviewing her friends and classmates. To investigators, her best friends, Sheila and Rachel, stuck out to them as potential suspects. However, they didn't have the evidence at the time to prove it. That is until Rachel suffered a nervous breakdown 6 months after the murder, leading to her mother calling 911. She was then hospitalized in a psychiatric facility for 5 days. After her release, she went straight to her lawyer's office and confessed. Rachel then led investigators to Skylar's body in Wayne Township, Greene County, Pennsylvania, less than 30 miles from Skylar's home. On March 13, 2013, It was announced that the remains found on January 16, 2013 had been officially identified as belonging to Skylar. Rachel also dropped a huge bombshell. She said that she and Sheila had both took part in killing Skylar because they didn't like her and didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Court transcripts revealed that Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schuff had meticulously planned Skylar's murder in advance. They packed cleaning rags, bleach, wet wipes, a shovel, and a change of clothes in the trunk of Sheila's car. Additionally, they wrapped 2 knives in towels and concealed them under their arms before picking Skylar up at 12:30 a.m. The girls, who had previously visited a remote area in Brave, Pennsylvania to smoke marijuana, drove there again. Once there, they pretended to have forgotten a lighter. When Skylar turned her back to get one from the car, Sheila and Rachel counted to 3 before launching their attack. Skylar tried to run, but Rachel tackled her and both girls began stabbing her repeatedly. At one point, Skylar managed to grab Rachel's knife and stab her above the ankle. Rachel claimed that this injury caused her to stop attacking, but Sheila continued stabbing Skylar until she fell silent. Rachel later testified that Sheila didn't stop until Skylar's neck stopped making weird sounds. Initially, the girls planned to bury Skylar's body, but the ground was too rocky and hard to dig. Instead, they covered her remains with branches, dirt, and leaves. Before leaving, they changed out of their bloody clothing, wiped themselves and the car down with wet wipes, and then drove home as if nothing had happened. However, at Rachel's May 2023 parole hearing, she provided a deeper motive. She and Sheila had been in a secret romantic relationship, which caused tension with Skylar. This had long been speculated, but was never confirmed until Rachel's testimony. Skylar's diary entries from fall 2011 also corroborated this claim. She wrote about a sleepover at Rachel's house with Sheila, where the 3 had been drinking alcohol. That night, Skylar witnessed Rachel and Sheila engaging in sexual activity. Skylar did not leave the room out of fear of running into Rachel's strict mother. On May 1, 2013, Rachel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She confessed to unlawfully, feloniously, willfully, maliciously, and intentionally causing the death of Skylar Neese by stabbing her and inflicting fatal injuries. Although her plea agreement recommended a 20-year sentence, Rachel was instead sentenced to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 10 years. In 2023, her parole request was denied. Sheila, on the other hand, was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Rachel has been denied parole twice, and Sheila will have her first chance at parole in 2028. One unsettling detail from the case is Rachel's diary entry from the day after the murder, where she extensively discussed the scholar's situation and sought forgiveness from God for what happened that night and for all these lies. Additionally, other students overheard conversations between Rachel and Sheila about the murder plot, but they never reported it, mistaking it for a joke. Skylar's parents, driven by their grief and determination, became advocates for missing children and pushed for new laws. Their efforts led to the enactment of Skylar's Law, which significantly reformed Amber Alert policies in West Virginia. Skylar's brutal murder stands as one of the most disturbing and senseless crimes committed by teenagers. It was fueled by jealousy, secrecy, and a profound sense of cruelty. Justin Reeb was born on April 1, 1990 in Enid, Oklahoma to Karen Dawson and Russell Reeb. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which made social interactions difficult. At some point, he told his family he was bisexual, but it didn't go over very well, and it's reported that they basically shunned him after that. He eventually left Waco, Oklahoma, and moved to Dallas, Texas, hoping for a fresh start, becoming known to many in his new community by his stage name Sean J. Walsh. By the time he was 22, he had been living in the Dallas area for about 3 years, building a life for himself. On November 30, 2012, his life was brutally cut short. Dustin's housemate, Tony Adams, came home from work around 5 p.m. and found Dustin's body in their Carrollton home, and along with many of his belongings missing. He had been stabbed multiple times and been beaten with a baseball bat. Investigators described the horrific scene, noting that blood was everywhere. Right away, Tony was a person of interest, as is often the case when someone discovers a body. However, after cooperating with police and providing names of potential suspects, he was cleared. One of the names he gave was Nathaniel Lee Guerrero, a social acquaintance of Dustin's. It didn't take long for investigators to track down stolen items that Guerrero had tried to pawn. The day before Dustin's murder, he and Guerrero had been at a mutual friend's house when Guerrero was accused of stealing an iPad. On the day of the murder, Dustin confronted him about it and Guerrero retaliated by beating and stabbing Dustin to death. On December 4, 2012, just days after the murder, Carrollton police arrested Guerrero. He already had a long rap sheet, including charges for assault, domestic violence, theft, and trespassing. In the end, he was convicted for the murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Thankfully, before his untimely death, Dustin had reconnected with his mother, Karen, after years of estrangement. They spent a month together in Oklahoma, which turned out to be a small comfort in the wake of his tragic death. Karen was outraged when Guerrero was sentenced to only 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving just 20 years. The reduced sentence happened because police had violated Guerrero's Miranda rights during the investigation, leading to his confession and other evidence being thrown out. Kieran believed the case was mishandled and that Guerrero should have faced a much harsher punishment, especially since the murder itself was so gruesome. Guerrero had beaten Dustin so badly that his face was unrecognizable, and Tony, who discovered his body, could only identify him by his clothes and distinctive eyebrows. It took dental records to officially confirm his identity. Dustin's death left a lasting impact on those who loved him. The whole ordeal left many wondering if justice was truly served. Kyra and Leah Christopher were 15-year-old twin sisters with bright futures ahead of them. They were students at Helix High School in Lemon Grove, California, balancing academics with their love for basketball. Their mother, Joan Hoyt, described them as kind, caring, and full of life. But in April 2020, their lives were cut short in a horrifying act of violence at the hands of someone who they once trusted. On April 15, 2020, Dwayne Edward Groves Jr., Joanne's ex-boyfriend, stormed into their home with a gun. Joanne had broken up with him about a week and a half earlier, and his response was pure rage. He called her just before the attack, telling her he had a plan and to trust him, but there was no warning for what came next. Moments later, he shot his way through a sliding glass door and immediately opened fire upon them. He shot Kyra first before moving through the house and killing Leah. He then turned his attention to Joanne's oldest son, 22-year-old Gary. He brutally beat Gary with the gun, leaving him with a broken arm and deep wounds to his head. Meanwhile, Joanne grabbed her younger children and fled the home. After attacking Gary, Groves fled the scene, trying to escape capture, but police found him hiding in a backyard just a few houses away. His gun was still at the scene with the serial numbers scratched off, a failed attempt to cover his tracks. Before leaving the house that night, he left Joanne with chilling final words. "You always wanted a story to write, now you have a book." When it came time for justice, Groves pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and an assault charge for attacking Gary. In court, Joanne spoke about how her family was torn apart and how her surviving children still suffer from the trauma of that night. In the end, Groves was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus an additional 72 years. The School for Boys, later called the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys, was a juvenile reform school run by the state of Florida from 1900 to 2011. Located in Mariana with a second campus opening in Okeechobee in 1955, it was once the largest reform school in the country. Over a period of 111 years, it became infamous for horrific abuse, including physical beatings, sexual assault, torture, and even murder at the hands of staff. Despite multiple investigations and promises of reform, the cruelty and mistreatment never stopped. Abuse at Dozier was reported as early as 1903, when children were found shackled in leg irons. Investigations over the years revealed shocking conditions, including a 1914 dormitory fire that killed at least 6 students, a 13-year-old boy dying in 1934, just 38 days after being sent there for trespassing and overcrowding with kids locked up for minor offenses like truancy or smoking. In 1968, Florida Governor Claude Kirk visited the school and was horrified by what he saw, saying someone should have blown the whistle a long time ago. At the time, the school held 564 boys, some as young as 10. Even though corporal punishment was officially banned that year, reports of violence, brutal beatings, and unexplained deaths continued. By the 1980s and 1990s, more stories of torture and mistreatment came out. The ACLU sued over cases where boys were hogtied and kept in isolation for weeks, and the Department of Justice stepped in to monitor Florida's juvenile justice system. In 2009, after Dozier failed a state inspection, new investigations confirmed ongoing abuse. After years of trouble, the school was finally shut down in June 2011. Even after it closed, dark secrets kept coming to light. Concerns about missing boys and unmarked graves led to an investigation in 2012, led by forensic anthropologist Erin Kimmerell from the University of South Florida. Her team found 55 burials, many outside the official cemetery, and uncovered records of nearly 100 deaths. By 2016, 7 DNA matches and 14 presumptive identifications had been made. In 2019, during a pollution cleanup, 27 more suspected graves were discovered, prompting Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to launch another investigation. One of the most infamous parts of Dozier was the White House, a detention building constructed in 1929. In the 1950s and the 1960s, it became the site of brutal beatings where guards whipped boys until they lost consciousness. Former students, now known as the White House Boys, later came forward to share their stories. One survivor, Jerry Cooper, recalled being beaten 135 times with a leather strap when he was just 16 years old. Others said they saw boys die from their injuries or locked inside industrial dryers as punishment. The state sealed the White House in 2008 and placed a memorial plaque there. In 2017, Florida officially apologized to Dozier survivors. The next year, the legislature approved funding for memorials in Tallahassee and Marianna, as well as financial restitution. In 2024, a bill sponsored by Representative Michelle Salzman and Senator Darrell Rouson was passed to compensate survivors and their families. Even today, men who endured the horrors of Dozier continue to fight for justice. In 2025, more than 800 survivors applied for restitution, and the Florida legislature allocated $20 million to be split among them. The legacy of Dozier's atrocities even inspired Colson Whitehead's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Nickel Boys, which was adapted into a film in 2024. The story of Dozier remains a dark chapter in Florida's history. For over a century, boys sent there, many of the pettiest of reasons, suffered unimaginable abuse. Even though the school is now gone, the scars remain and survivors continue to demand justice for those who never made it out. Kathleen Ruth Smiley was born on May 22, 1957 in Florida and went by Kathy. By 1974, 16-year-old Kathy was now living in the northern suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, where she was known as a friendly, warm, spirited, and ambitious girl. She had moved with her family to the area a few years prior after spending time overseas. She was a senior at Lakeside High School in DeKalb County, where she was recognized for her academic drive, taking extra classes to graduate a year early. Kathy had big dreams, initially aspiring to become a veterinarian, but later considered teaching as a career. Despite her ambitions, Kathy's life was shaped by the complexities of her family circumstances. Her parents, Dale and Jacqueline Smiley, had recently separated, and her father had moved to Minneapolis for his job. Kathy, her younger sister Patricia, and their mother had stayed behind in Atlanta. Regardless of his relocation, Kathy's father, a corporate marketing representative for Gillette, was still a significant part of her life. The weekend of April 20th, 1974, was when Kathy was looking forward to because her father planned to visit for a family day at Lake Lanier, where they would picnic and swim. The morning after arriving, Kathy and Patricia drove to a Denny's restaurant to meet their father for breakfast. Kathy had just turned 16 the previous year and was given a red 1972 Volkswagen Beetle as a gift. After breakfast, Kathy's father agreed to take Patricia with him to the lake while Kathy was to go home to retrieve her swimsuit and water skis. Sadly, it was the last time Patricia and her father saw Kathy alive. After parting ways at the restaurant, Kathy made a quick phone call to her mother, letting her know that she would be heading home soon to grab a few things before joining them at the lake, but she never returned. Kathy's path took her to an access road near Interstate 85, where she encountered two men, Pinckney Thomas Mitchell and Wallace Charles Lanford, both fugitives from North Carolina. They were looking for a way to get back to their home state, having recently escaped their respective troubles. Mitchell and Lanford, both in their early 20s, were desperate for money and drugs. After meeting Kathy, they convinced her to help them by offering her some gas for her car in exchange for a ride to North Carolina. Kathy, trusting or simply not thinking of the danger, agreed. She drove her red Volkswagen to a nearby Shell service station on Shellaford Road, where the men bought gas. A clerk recalled that Mitchell, who seemed fidgety and out of place, was acting oddly as he asked about the route to Lake Lanier and North Carolina, requesting a map of the area. At the same station, Mitchell took a rope from the ground, secretly pocketing it as he made small talk. After filling the car, Kathy, Mitchell, and Lanford drove away from the station unaware of the impending violence. Somewhere between Shallowford Road and the exit toward Lake Lanier, the two men overpowered Kathy. They pulled her off the road and drove her to Gaston County, North Carolina. Once there, they took her into a wooded area near the old Lincoln Academy where they sexually assaulted her. In a statement later given to authorities, described how he had sexually assaulted Kathy before Lanford took his turn. The violence escalated and Mitchell, fueled by drugs and anger, viciously attacked Kathy, stabbing her repeatedly. After killing her, they tied her lifeless body to a tree, leaving it in the woods as they drove away. They returned to the area hours later, where they attempted to cover up their crime by burning Kathy's car and disposing of the evidence. Mitchell, in the presence of Lanford, later bragged to his brother-in-law Stuart about what they had done. He admitted to the murder, describing it as a big one. This confession was later used against them during their trial. Kathy's body was found later that afternoon, about 5 hours after she was last seen. Her body was discovered by a passerby near the old Lincoln Academy, where she had been left dead, bound and gagged with an electrical cord. The brutality of the crime shocked the local community. The Volkswagen, which the men had set ablaze, was discovered burned beyond recognition. Their subsequent attempt to cover up their involvement failed, and soon the police had enough evidence to arrest them. During their trial, it was revealed that Mitchell had a criminal history. He had previously been convicted of crimes such as traffic offenses, assault, and larceny, and had escaped from a correctional facility in North Carolina. Despite the chilling details of the murder, the defendant's defense strategies varied. Mitchell claimed he didn't remember killing Kathy, attributing the violence to a drug-induced haze, but his statements and actions left little room for doubt. Lanford, although admitting to being present at the scene, denied participating in the assault, but his presence and the evidence pointed to his complicity in the crime. In the end, both were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. However, the death sentences were later commuted to life in prison. Both Mitchell and Lanford have since passed while still in prison. The haunting nature of her death, combined with the eerie atmosphere of the Lincoln Academy site, led to rumors that Kathy's spirit still lingered in the woods, a tragic figure trapped by the violence she suffered. In the 40 years following her death, the location where Kathy was killed has become infamous, with many visitors reporting strange occurrences and an overwhelming sense of sorrow hanging over the area. Whether these reports are rooted in truth or simply the product of a community's grief and fear, Kathy's memory has lived on. Though the murderers were eventually caught, the emotional toll of Kathy's brutal killing continued to echo through her community for decades. The horror of that day on April 21, 1974, is one that still lingers in the hearts of those who knew her. Nadine Jersenki was born in the early 1970s and spent most of her life in Toronto, Canada. By age 26, Nadine was working at a local strip club and was described as a young woman navigating life like many others her age, unaware of the brutal fate that would soon befall her. On May 8, 1999, police in Lincoln, a small town in Ontario's Niagara region, responded to a call about a disturbing discovery. Around 5 p.m., uniformed officers arrived at Victoria Avenue near 8th Avenue, where a passerby had spotted the partially clothed body of a woman lying in a roadside ditch. That woman was Nadine. It took authorities 2 weeks to identify her, finally doing so after releasing images of her face to the public and receiving crucial tips. Investigators quickly determined that Nadine had been strangled to death. However, despite collecting DNA evidence from the crime scene, no matches appeared in any existing databases. From the outset, detectives believed her killer was likely a truck driver, leading them to check truck stops between Niagara and Mississauga, where Nadine worked. In 2006, years after Nadine's murder, police charged Michael Durant in connection with 2 separate murders. One involving an exotic dancer whose body was discovered in a wooded area in January 2006, and another involving a sex trade worker who vanished in August 2003. Given Nadine's profession and the similarities in victim profiles, investigators considered whether Durant might be linked to her case. However, he was eventually ruled out as a suspect. For years, Nadine's case went cold. Despite exhaustive efforts, consulting national DNA databases, collaborating with Interpol, and coordinating with agencies in the US and UK, no significant lead surfaced. In 2021, new hope emerged. Advances in forensic technology offered investigators an opportunity to revisit the case through genetic genealogy, a method unavailable when Nadine was killed. The Niagara Regional Police Service Homicide Unit teamed up with the Toronto Police Service Cold Case Unit, the Centre of Forensic Sciences, the Chief Coroner's Office, and Ontario's Ministry of the Attorney General to apply these cutting-edge tools to the lingering mystery. The killer's DNA profile, initially collected at the crime scene, was sent to a US-based laboratory specializing in genetic genealogy. In 2023, their efforts finally paid off when the killer was identified as Joseph Archie Brousseau, who went by Raymond. Unfortunately, I was unable to find a photo of him. Brousseau was a truck driver originally from New Liskeard, a town in northern Ontario. He was 34 years old at the time of Nadine's murder and died in 2017, years before police were able to confirm his involvement. Investigators were able to obtain a DNA sample from Brousseau posthumously and compared it to the DNA left at the crime scene, and it was a match. Further investigation revealed that Brousseau matched the original profile built by police. He had worked as a long-haul truck driver for many years, traveling extensively across Canada and the United States. There was also evidence indicating that Brousseau frequented the Niagara region during his trucking routes, though no records suggested any prior connection to Nadine before their fatal encounter. Detectives now believe Brousseau likely picked Nadine up after work and killed her shortly after. His DNA has not been linked to any other unsolved cases in Canada's national DNA database, and no additional crimes connected to him have surfaced. 1993, Soul Asylum's Runaway Train music video featured images of 36 missing children in the US version, aiming to raise awareness and aid in their recovery. The video became a groundbreaking effort with over 70 missing children featured globally across various regional versions, including the UK, Canada, Australia, and a Spanish version featured on the show Quien Sabe Dónde, which focused on missing children in Spanish-speaking countries. Its widespread exposure on platforms like MTV significantly boosted public awareness and directly contributed to the recovery of multiple children. Runaway Train became a groundbreaking example of how music and media could be harnessed for social activism, blending emotional storytelling with real-world action to help solve cold cases. The song's global reach made a significant impact, leading to the recovery of 21 children. However, not all recoveries led to joyful reunions, as some children had fled abusive or traumatic situations and did not want to be found. Among the children, Dina McNichol and Vicky Hamilton were featured in the UK version of the video. In 2007, their remains were discovered in the garden of Scottish serial killer Peter Tobin. Andrea Bowman, featured in the US version, disappeared in 1989, and in 2020, her adopted father confessed to her murder. Despite the video's success, as of 2019, 11 children featured in the video remain unaccounted for. These include Andrea Durham, last seen at her Florida apartment in 1990, Byron Page, who vanished from Los Angeles in 1992, and Christopher Kersey, who disappeared from his home in Minnesota in 1990. A particularly powerful story comes from Elizabeth Wiles, now known as Liz Vadovac, who shared her experience as one of the missing children featured in the video during an interview with Zuri Hall. At 13 years old, Liz ran away from home with her 19-year-old boyfriend, Ron. They hitchhiked from California and lived under the radar for nearly 2 years, renting a small one-bedroom apartment while Liz kept low profile to avoid drawing attention due to her youthful appearance. Unbeknownst to Liz, Sola Salam's frontman Dave Pirner was collaborating with director Tony Kaye on the music video. Inspired by the idea of missing children featured on milk cartons, they aimed to use the video to help find real missing children. When the video was released, Liz saw herself featured while visiting a friend's house. The sight terrified her, and her boyfriend suggested it might be time to consider going home. A shocking realization for Liz, whose entire life had revolved around being with him. Overwhelmed by fear and emotions, Liz tried to take her own life. Fortunately, a friend intervened just in time and Liz was taken to the hospital, where she called her mother for the first time in years to let her know she was alive and safe. Returning home proved difficult for Liz. The first 5 to 10 years were marked by struggles as she tried to find her place in life. It wasn't until she met her husband that she began to feel valued and secure. For years, Liz hid her past, fearing judgment for the mistakes she had made. Eventually, she realized that sharing her story could help others dealing with similar struggles. What initially seemed like a painful reminder of her past became a source of healing and hope. For both Liz and other families affected by missing persons cases, the runaway train video stands as a testament to the power of media to create life-changing impacts and bring attention to those who need it most. Alexandra Allie Kemp was born on October 11, 1982 and grew up in Leawood, Kansas, where she lived with her parents and 2 brothers. At the age of 19, she completed her first year of college at Kansas State University and then returned home to Leawood. She had plans to work a summer job at the local Foxborough pool with her high school boyfriend, Phil Howes, and her brother, Tyler. She was also hoping to spend time with family and friends. On June 18, 2002, worked the early shift before Allie arrived for her afternoon shift. Tyler had agreed to take over around 5 p.m. so Allie could head home and get ready for a date she had planned with Phil. However, when Tyler arrived, Allie was nowhere to be found and the pool was left unattended. Allie's books that she had been reading were still on the table, as was her phone. Tyler knew his sister would never leave the pool unattended, and so after a short search, he called his father in a panic. Their father, Roger Kemp, quickly dropped what he was doing and rushed to the pool. When he arrived, Tyler was still looking for his sister. The 2 of them continued their search, checking more and more unlikely places. The last place they checked was the pump house, and it was there that he saw what looked like a human leg partially covered with a blue tarp. Roger pulled the tarp away and shockingly discovered his daughter's beaten body. He immediately called 911, and she was rushed to the hospital but would sadly not survive. The medical examiner found her body covered in bruises and marks on her neck indicated that she had been strangled. Investigators began combing the scene, looking for any clues that might lead them to her killer. During their search, they found a small ointment cap, which they believed might have come from a first aid kit. News of her murder began to spread quickly, leading to a crowd at the scene. The police watched the crowd carefully, hoping to spot a nervous or suspicious person, but at the time, nothing came of it. With no options left, they began interviewing everyone that had a connection to Allie. While they interviewed her friends and family, one person really stuck out, her long-term boyfriend, Phil. The 2 were high school sweethearts, but cut off the relationship when Allie went off to college. However, when she returned for the summer, they started the relationship back up. Detectives quickly learned from Phil that Allie had attempted to contact him just a few hours before her body was discovered. He had a missed call and voicemail from her at 2:52 p.m. He tried to call her back once he saw the message, but she never picked up. As for Phil's movements, He had left his shift at the pool to work his second job before calling in to play video games at a friend's house. Both these activities were corroborated by the people Phil had claimed to be with. He first became aware of the situation when he received a call telling him Allie was in the hospital. Since Phil had a solid alibi, he was quickly ruled out, along with every member of Allie's close friends and family. At this point, investigators were at a loss, but all that would change when a frequent visitor to the pool came forward and told an interesting story. They said a week before the murder, they saw a person hiding in the bushes nearby holding a pair of binoculars. They also got a tip from a lawn crew working nearby who said they saw a beige Ford pickup truck on the day of the murder. They said the truck came and went multiple times that day, which they found strange. Word of the pickup truck began to spread around the small town and led to multiple tips from people claiming to have information on it. However, they were never able to identify it. Investigators would eventually get new information from one of Allie's friends, Laurel. She said that she arrived at the pool around 3:15 p.m. and wanted to surprise her. So, she sat in her car and continuously honked her horn, hoping to get a reaction from Allie, but she never did. Instead, she noticed a man walking out of the pump room. Thinking it was Ali's boss, she panicked and ducked down behind her dashboard. From her hiding place, she continued to watch the man as he walked casually away from the building, waved in her direction, climbed into his vehicle and drove off. Once he had left, Laurel went into the pool area to search for Allie, but left when there was no sign of her. She gave a description of the man, and a sketch artist was able to create a composite image. Thanks to her visit, detectives now had a time frame to work with. They already knew that Phil had received a missed call from Allie at 2:52 p.m., and now they had Laurel's visit placed at 3:15 p.m. That left a 23-minute window in which Allie was most likely attacked. After the sketch was released, multiple people began bringing in family photos of people they believed might be the killer. This eventually led them to James Strader, a mechanic who worked 20 minutes away in Olathe, Kansas, and had a striking resemblance to the man in the sketch. However, investigators would leave disappointed because James was working on the day of the murder, a fact that was confirmed by his boss. Investigators continued searching for a suspect, but in the meanwhile, a forensic team began testing the blood that was found on the small ointment cap. While most of the blood at the scene was linked to Allie, the blood found on the cap belonged to an unknown individual. They ran it through Cody's, but unfortunately, there were no matches found. 18 months into the investigation, the leads had basically dried up, so they decided to reach out to the local media. In January 2003, a mugshot appeared on a news broadcast showing a man who was suspected of sexually assaulting 3 women. Detectives on the case recognized the face immediately. It was the mechanic, James Strader, who was ruled out after providing an alibi. However, with this latest news in hand, they decided it was time to take another look. Most importantly, they needed to get a sample of his DNA. Investigators also wanted to bring James in for more questioning, but he eluded the police for 3 long weeks. He was finally apprehended after leaving a gas station in Utah without paying and was immediately pulled over by state police. After being brought in, he agreed that he resembled the sketch, but denied any involvement in the murder. Officers in Utah had also taken a sample of his DNA and uploaded it to the Cody's database, but strangely it wasn't a match, and once again he was ruled out. After months had gone by with no suspect in sight, Bob Vesseler with Lamar Advertising decided to donate a billboard for free with information about the murder. After the billboard went up, investigators were given the name of Teddy Hoover by 2 separate people. Teddy resembled the composite image and owned a truck. He also maintained pools for a living but said he never worked on that particular pool. Teddy refused to submit his DNA for testing and asked to speak to his lawyer before agreeing to anything. Teddy's lawyer said he was concerned about his privacy and didn't want his DNA to sit in Cody's. So the officers presented him with a deal. They would test the DNA but would never upload it to the Cody's database. While waiting for Teddy to make a decision, detectives went back through their old notes and made a surprising discovery. Teddy had been at the scene on the day of the murder and had already spoken to detectives. Police notes showed his name listed amongst the bystanders interviewed at the pool. After 3 days of nothing, detectives called Teddy's lawyer, who informed them that his client had taken off. Months would go by with no signs of Teddy anywhere before they finally received an important tip in August 2004. The tip suggested that Teddy Hoover was actually Benjamin Appleby and he had fled to Connecticut. He had been living under the Hoover alias to avoid prosecution for a 1997 sex offense. Thankfully, when he was finally taken in, the Connecticut State Police took a sample of his DNA. However, he continued to deny his involvement. Investigators then decided to put him in the investigation room where they had 2 binders on the table bearing his names. There was also a pin board with his photograph and pictures from the crime scene. Eventually, he broke down crying and admitted to killing Allie. He recounted the events, saying he visited the pool as part of his maintenance work and Allie was there when he stepped into the pump house. Benjamin made a pass at Allie by attempting to touch her, but she pushed him away, causing him to lose control. He also said he planned to sexually assault her and had grabbed the ointment to use in the process, but was interrupted when Laurel began honking her horn. He said he collected himself, leaving calmly and giving her a friendly wave as he walked to his vehicle. The DNA results confirmed Benjamin's confession and he was arrested. However, when he entered the courtroom, he pleaded not guilty and claimed that his confession was coerced. He even accused the police of intimidation and threats against him and his family. However, DNA doesn't lie, so his attorney said he did kill her but claimed it wasn't premeditated. However, based on the evidence, the investigators knew this wasn't true. In the end, Appleby was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 50 years in jail. After the trial, Allie's parents organized Take Defense, the Allie Kemp Educational Foundation, a program that offers self-defense classes for women. Sadly, on April 4, 2022, Roger Kemp passed away at the age of 77. His sudden death left his friends and family devastated, and the Allie Kemp Educational Foundation released the following statement. Throughout the past 20 years, the foundation and the self-defense program have worked in conjunction to successfully train over 70,000 girls and women across the United States ranging in age from 12 to 90 years. Perry was born on February 22, 1955 to parents Marvin and Jean in Linton, North Dakota. She and her high school sweetheart, Bruce Perry, graduated in 1973 and then married the next year on August 17, 1974. Arliss worked for a Christian youth group, taught Sunday school, and was described as trusting, joyful, and optimistic. Weeks after their marriage, they moved to Palo Alto, California to attend Stanford University. They moved into Quillen Hall in Escondido Village, a residence hall for married couples and partners with children. Bruce was now a second-year pre-med student who also maintained a job in order to support Arliss and himself. However, this caused Arliss to be alone most days, and she would even write friends and family back home saying she felt isolated because Bruce was so busy with school and work. Arliss then got a job as a receptionist at a nearby law firm, and this gave her the outlet she needed. She then began enjoying life in California and finally felt that things were falling into place. At 11:30 p.m. on October 12, 1974, Arliss had some letters she wanted to mail, and so she and Bruce left Quillen Hall and began walking. However, during their walk, they would get into an argument about their car's tire pressure. Arliss then told Bruce that she wanted to go to the church to unwind and have some alone time. After parting ways, Bruce returned home. At 11:50 p.m., Stephen Crawford, who worked security at the church, saw Arliss enter. 2 other people in the church also saw Arliss enter, go to a pew, and kneel to pray. When they left, she was still praying. At about 12:10 a.m., Stephen entered the church but didn't see anyone. He announced that he was locking up but never received a response. Not long after, Bruce became concerned when Arliss didn't show back up. So he walked the half-mile to the church to look for her. However, when he arrived, all the doors were locked. He then decided to walk around campus searching for her. After being unable to find her, he returned home and waited until about 3 a.m. before reporting her missing. Bruce told authorities that she may have fallen asleep in the church. So they walked to the church and checked all the doors, but they were locked. They tried calling out to see if anyone was inside, but no one answered. A few hours later, The same security guard returned to the church to open it for the day. When Stephen entered the church, he found Orlis's deceased body and called it in saying, "Hey, we've got a stiff here." She was found lying partially nude on the front pew of the altar with her neck broken and her arms crossed over her chest with a candle in between. She had been beaten, strangled, sexually assaulted, and ultimately murdered with an ice pick. Investigators would also find a latent palm print on one of the candles near her body. It was later said that the crime scene resembled a satanic ritual. Strangely, when the cops arrived to question Bruce, they noticed he was covered in blood. He explained that he suffered from severe nosebleeds whenever he was stressed. Instead of telling Bruce the details of what they found, they asked him to come to the police station for questioning. They questioned him for 2 hours, creating various situations to elicit a reaction from him. For example, Arliss was cheating and he discovered it, or Arliss was pregnant and he was unhappy about it. Bruce voluntarily provided his prints for testing and took a polygraph examination. His prints didn't match the palm print found at the scene, and he passed the polygraph test and was no longer considered a suspect. That is, when they finally told him that his wife had been murdered. The FBI got involved and developed a profile of the murderer. They believed the killer was a loner with a military background between the ages of 17 and 22, and that he would collect possessions of his victims as souvenirs. It's also of note that Arliss was missing 2 objects from her possession. Investigators believe Arliss was still in the church with her killer when Stephen came to lock up. Someone passing by the church reported seeing a man with sandy blonde hair enter the church at the same moment Arliss did. Another passerby between 12:15 and 12:30 heard a strange sound coming from inside the church, and when they stopped, the noise also stopped. When Bruce called the police to report Arliss missing, Stephen said he did a sweep of the church around 2 a.m. and the police performed a sweep of the outside around 3 a.m. Strangely, both times all the doors were found locked. Stephen was initially considered a suspect but was ruled out after he passed a polygraph test, and his palm print didn't match the latent palm print found at the scene. There was some suspicion regarding the Stanford Chapel dean because he also had access to the church, but he passed a polygraph test as well. The handprint was compared to over 100 suspects, but no match was found. Sadly, the case would go unsolved for the next 4 decades. A co-worker of Arliss's at the law firm said that a man with sandy blonde hair and an athletic body had paid her a visit at work. The man and Arliss talked for about 15 minutes, and when Arliss returned, she appeared to be upset. Bruce was also asked about the man but stated he had no idea who the individual could have been. After Arliss' body was returned to Bismarck, North Dakota and buried, someone stole her temporary burial marker. This was strange because it was the only one stolen. This made people wonder if her killer was from Bismarck and had traveled to California to murder her. Part of Bruce's parents' job was to try and convert members of a satanic cult to Christianity. The cult was known as the Process Church of Final Judgment. They were into Scientology and Satanism and were known to perform rituals. 13 years later, in 1987, a book titled The Ultimate Evil, published by Marie Terry, reopened the entire satanic pentagram world once more. He was at odds with the police for dismissing Arliss and the Process Church of Final Judgment and claimed that the man Arliss was arguing with at work the day before she was murdered was a member of the Satanic Church. He further alleged that Arliss purposefully provoked an argument with Bruce to get some alone time with the man. The book became very popular, and he was even able to sell out a 1,000-seat capacity venue where he would sit and discuss the case's theories. In his book, he discusses a theory about her murderer possibly being the serial killer, the son of Sam. In 1978, 4 years after Arliss's murder, David Berkowitz wrote to Arliss's home in North Dakota, claiming that the Process Church of Final Judgment hired a hitman to kill her because she wanted to convert them to Christianity. He told them that the cult was nationwide and that they would kill individuals throughout the country. He knew this because he claimed to be a member himself. He stated that Charles Manson and serial killer Otis Toole were also members. Berkowitz then sent a book to a police officer in North Dakota in 1979, and in the book he wrote, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, Stanford University. 2 officers from California flew to New York to question Berkowitz about the murder, and after about 30 minutes, he stopped talking and stated he didn't want the other convicts to think he was a snitch. So the police considered him useless and moved on. Arliss's murder was eventually linked to the murders of two other women at Stanford University. People came forward to say they saw the same type of man with sandy blonde hair roaming the area around the time of those murders as well. The police even questioned Ted Bundy, who was frequently in California between 1973 and 1974. However, he was ruled out as a suspect since he had an alibi for the night of the murder. Finally, in 2016, the police received a break in the case. They discovered a DNA profile of a male downed on Arliss's jeans the night she was murdered. Police set out to interview everyone in the vicinity that night and collect DNA samples from each person. With that, they were able to eliminate everyone but the church's night guard, Stephen Crawford. Stephen Crawford, now 72 years old, was a veteran of the United States Air Force who began working as a police officer at Stanford University in the Department of Public Safety in 1971. However, in 1972, a new police chief decided to reorganize the department, and most of the police officers were offered jobs as security guards instead. Stephen despised this and began stealing items such as artworks and books and eventually left Stanford in 1976. In 1992, his ex-wife reported him for creating a false diploma with a blank certificate obtained from Stanford. He was subsequently prosecuted and arrested for stealing thousands of dollars worth of various items from the university. In the end, he would receive a 6-month suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. In 1993, he relocated to San Jose, California, where he lived at the Dale Coronado apartment complex. He worked as an insurance adjuster and led a relatively quiet life. Even though his palm print didn't match the one found at the scene, and he passed the polygraph test, Crawford had remained a person of interest all those years. They compared his DNA to the DNA recovered on Arliss's jeans, and lo and behold, it was a match. On June 28, 2018, investigators visited Crawford's apartment at 9:05 a.m. Instead of letting them in, he shouted, asking them to wait while he got dressed. The police waited for a few minutes and then entered his apartment using the master key they got from the building manager. After entering, they saw Crawford seated on the bed with a handgun and backed away. After hearing a gunshot, they entered and discovered Crawford on the floor with a self-inflicted wound. Upon searching his apartment, they discovered a copy of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, as well as a handwritten suicide note on his desk written in 2016. When investigators began to reinvestigate him, however, there was no mention of Arliss in the note. Unfortunately, this leaves us with some unanswered questions, such as was the murder of Arliss part of his revenge against the university? Was she his only victim? Or was he a notorious serial killer who got away with murder for many years? Was the satanic ritual part of his MO or just a way to throw off the investigators? Sadly, we will probably never know the answers to these questions. Terry Ann Seebeck was born on March 31, 1977 in Marion, Illinois. She grew up to be an artist, painting for a living, and eventually met Candace Majors, a Mount Carmel native born in 1981, and the two began a relationship. Candace and Terry were two single mothers living in West Frankfort, Illinois, and wanted to turn their lives around. They both had battled drug addictions but found sobriety with the support of each other. Finally, in 2007, the couple moved in together. Terry was working for her father's painting business while Candace was training to become a radiologist. Their lives finally seemed to be on the right track until one day tragedy struck them both. On October 19, 2009, Terry's aunt called 911 because Terry had missed work and no one could get in touch with her or Candace. Her aunt's on the house where the couple lived, and after arriving, she saw the front door covered in blood and decided to wait for the police to arrive. When police entered the home, they would shockingly find 28-year-old Candace and 32-year-old Terry's deceased bodies. An autopsy determined they were shot execution style by a small caliber handgun. Both of their credit cards and IDs were missing, as was Terry's Chevrolet Impala. However, there were no signs of a break-in and other valuables were left behind. In speaking with the women's friends, detectives learned of another couple, 19-year-old Afton Ferris and 29-year-old Michael Challert, who had been living with them for the past few weeks. Michael was born in 1979 and grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He became a father at the age of 15, and by the time he was an adult, he was drifting around the Midwest, working odd jobs and moving from place to place. He met Terry in West Frankfort, and she allowed him to stay with her for a period of time. Michael returned to Cheyenne in 2008, where he met Afton, who was homeless at the time. She had grown up in foster care and could not hold down a job despite being valedictorian of her high school. Detectives then learned that Candace and Terry had accused Afton and Michael of stealing CDs, a tank top, and other things from them. After discovering this, they asked the couple to move out one day before the murders. Investigators wanted to question the couple, but they were nowhere to be found. They then learned that after being kicked out, they stayed with another friend. That friend told police that Afton and Michael left in the middle of the night and stole his .22 Ruger handgun. A day after the murder, Afton and Michael were named persons of interest. In speaking with Michael's family, they learned his friendship with Terry went back years. Because of this, they found it hard to believe he was behind such brutal acts of violence. During the investigation, officers obtained security camera footage from a local gas station that showed Michael filling up Terry's car and paying for it with Candace's credit card. Activity on Candace's credit card helped investigators track the couple over 1,000 miles away in Larimer County, Colorado. They learned Michael had a friend who lived in a trailer park in Fort Collins, Colorado, and that's where they would find Terry's car parked outside. They then found Afton and Michael and took them into custody. Upon entering the trailer, they found blood-stained clothing belonging to Afton, stolen credit cards, and a black purse containing the murder weapon. A handwritten poem titled Bullets and Weed was found inside Candace's car and signed by Afton. It read, "Seems like we got nowhere to run to and no way to go back. Guess the only way to go is to take this handful of bullets in a pocket full of weed." Another note found inside the car read, "We are sorry we did this. I wish we hadn't done this, but we had been pushed too far." Terry and Candace were thieves and liars, and they continuously stole from one another and blamed it on somebody else, and we continuously got the blame. In her interview with police, Afton admitted to stealing the murder weapon. She said they originally intended to rob Terry and Candace, but they decided to kill them when they got to their house, claiming that they didn't have any other choice. Afton said that in order to gain entrance into the home, Michael told the women he was there to apologize. But instead, after being let in, he gunned them down in cold blood. She said she saw Candace was attempting to escape, so she grabbed her and brought her back in while Michael shot her again. In his interview with police, Michael admitted to murdering the victims with Afton's help. He said he and Afton also planned to take their own lives as well. Following their confessions, Afton and Michael were both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Michael pleaded guilty to both counts and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Afton decided to go to trial, where she was found guilty of murder, home invasion, and armed robbery. She was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Paige Johnson was born on August 28, 1993 in Edgewood, Kentucky. As a teen, she lived in Covington, Kentucky, and was described as outspoken, feisty, and kind. During high school, 16-year-old Paige gave birth to a baby girl and ultimately quit school to care for her new daughter. On September 22, 2010, a few weeks after turning 17, Paige wanted to go out and have some fun. She made plans to go to a house party with 22-year-old Jacob Bumpass. She also made plans to end up at her sister Brittany's house, but she left her cell phone at home and told her sister she would call from a different number to update her on her plans. Brittany kept waiting for Paige to call, but that call never came. She wasn't concerned until Brittany failed to return home the following day. She called her mother Donna Johnson to ask if she'd seen Paige, but she hadn't either. At that point, the family decided to report her missing. When officers initially took the case, they believed that Paige was either still partying somewhere or was just another teen runaway. The police assumed she would return in a couple of days, so they didn't initially take action. Paige's family stayed adamant that Paige was a devoted mother who would have never abandoned her daughter. Since the police weren't being very helpful, the family decided to search for her themselves. They posted flyers, formed search parties, and talked to every person Paige knew, including Jacob, the boy she was with the night she disappeared. Paige's family questioned Jacob about that night, and he told them that he dropped her off at Brittany's house around 1 a.m. and left without looking back. He then initially lied about giving her alcohol, but later admitted to giving her beer. After talking with Paige's family, he quickly lawyered up and stopped cooperating. He stopped participating in searches and never answered another question. A few days after her disappearance, the police finally began their investigation by requesting tips from the public. They then quickly turned their attention to Jacob. He then gave them the same BS story and wouldn't cooperate any further. The police then decided to look at Jacob's cell phone data and noticed his story didn't match. He reportedly dropped Paige off near Brittany's house at 1 a.m. at 15th Street and Scott Street in Covington. But his phone records showed him elsewhere. And at about 4 a.m., his phone pinged near East Fork Lake about 25 miles away. From that lake, Jacob posted a couple of random updates on Facebook talking about his insomnia and love for fishing. This was strange because Jacob had never posted comments like this before and never did again. The timing was also odd, and it seemed like he was trying to create an alibi. The police then decided to search the lake, but it was over 4,000 acres. They spent weeks looking for Paige or any clue related to the case, but they ended up empty-handed. In 2011, Paige was declared legally dead, allowing her family to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Jacob. However, in court, Jacob kept pleading the fifth, and when asked to take a polygraph test, he refused. It would be another 10 years before the family would finally have some long-awaited answers. During this time, the family kept hearing rumors about Paige being passed out at a party. Multiple people at the party recalled seeing Jacob and another young man carry her out. Finally, in March 2020, almost 10 years after Paige went missing, a married couple who were out deer hunting near the East Fork Lake found some burned human remains. They were found in a wooded area off Mathis Road in Claremont County, Ohio. The police quickly sent a search team and unearthed the remains located 45 minutes from Paige's home in Florence. Because so much time had passed, dental records were used to confirm the remains belonged to Paige. The body was found about 2 miles away from their initial search radius. Interestingly, it was only a mile from where Jacob's phone pinged on the night of her disappearance. Unfortunately, they were unable to get enough conclusive evidence due to the body's decomposition to charge Jacob with murder. Instead, they charged him with abuse of a corpse and tampering with evidence. In June 2020, he was indicted but pleaded not guilty. He was released on bond and is currently awaiting trial with the next hearing scheduled for July 2023. At this point, the prosecution may never be able to prove foul play, but they are hopeful they can at least convict Jacob for actively hiding her deceased body. While there are theories about what might have happened to Paige, including drug overdose and sexual assault, the prosecution claims they may never prove foul play. The body had decomposed beyond recognition, and there was insufficient evidence to charge someone with homicide. But the police are confident of one thing. Paige died on Jacob's watch, and he actively concealed the facts. Noma Stamey Cobb was born on November 16, 1962 in Lincoln County, North Carolina. At the age of 29, Nona was a widow with a 3-year-old son named Josh, but due to her struggles with substance abuse, Nona's sister was granted custody of Josh. On July 7, 1992, at 6:15 a.m., Nona was found strangled to death on the northbound side of Interstate 77 near Elkin in Surry County, North Carolina. She was last seen the night before getting into a truck driven by an unidentified man at the Welcome Center on Interstate 85 in Cleveland County. Unfortunately, with very few leads to go on, the case would go unsolved for the next 30 years. About 3 years into the case, investigators suspected the killer might be a truck driver by the name of Sean Patrick Goebel. Goebel had confessed to the murders of Brenda Hadji, Sherry Munger, and Alice Haynes. Goebel of Ashboro, North Carolina targeted sex workers and transported them over state lines before dumping their bodies on different interstates in multiple states. Investigators looked into dozens of murders across several states that matched Goebel's pattern, including Nona's. However, in 1995, they were able to rule him out as a suspect when his DNA didn't match the DNA found on Nona's body. 26 years later, in 2021, investigators got a break in the case after providing DNA found on the victim to Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick with Identifiers International. With the use of genetic genealogy, investigators finally had a suspect, 71-year-old Warren Luther Alexander of Diamond Head, Mississippi. On March 27, 2022, Alexander was extradited back to North Carolina and officially charged with Nona's murder. On June 24, 2000, two motorists traveling along Flamingo Road near Cooper City, Florida, came across a suitcase by the roadside. Inside, they would find the deceased body of a female who was later identified as 35-year-old Kimberly Dietz Libsey. A couple of weeks later, on August 9, 2000, motorists found a duffel bag discarded by the side of a road near Dania Beach, Florida. Inside was the body of Sia Dimos. On August 30, 2001, a third body was found in Biscayne Bay in Miami, Florida, and was identified as Jessica Good. Jessica's boyfriend would say she had gone to meet a light-skinned Hispanic man but never came back. Each of the victims were murdered, and while they were able to collect fingerprints from two of the crime scenes, they were unable to match them to anyone. Their first suspect was Roberto Fernandez, but before he could be arrested, he fled back to Brazil, which does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. In 1996, Fernandez was accused of killing his wife, Danielle Fernandez, in Brazil. On the early morning of November 18, 1996, their neighbors in Londrina, Brazil, were disturbed by a domestic dispute coming from their apartment, which ended after at least 6 shots were fired. After notifying the police that Fernandez had fled in his car together with his 5-year-old daughter, officers soon managed to arrest the 31-year-old licensed pilot. His wife, Danielle, was taken to the hospital but would sadly die of her injuries shortly afterward. The murder shocked the locals, who considered the Fernandezes a nice, wholesome family. But after the murder, it was discovered that the scuffle occurred after she caught Fernandez cheating on her with a call girl. Fernandez alleged that during their fight, Daniel had threatened to shoot him with a revolver, causing him to panic and accidentally kill her using his handgun. However, later, prosecutors revealed that the call girl had come by the police station, alleging that Fernandez had attempted to kill her. The woman would say that during her encounter with Fernandez, he started doing drugs and drinking a large amount of alcohol. She said he then started kicking and punching her and even hit her with a water bottle. This eventually spiraled into him attempting to drown her in the motel's bathtub, but she managed to free herself and run towards the door. To counter these accusations, Fernandez and his lawyers claimed that his wife had been drunk and acting irrationally while simultaneously trying to discredit the call girl's testimony. In their account, she was the one who had hit him during their encounter. Despite the conflicting physical evidence against Fernandez, he was ultimately acquitted. Following the verdict, it was alleged that his in-laws were so enraged by the outcome that they hired someone to kill him. Supposedly fearing for his life and wanting to leave his past behind, he fled to the United States and settled in Miami, Florida. Between 1996 and 1999, he worked as a bus driver for a touring company and as a flight attendant at the Miami International Airport. During this time, he continued to frequent call girls. Years later, in 2011, fingerprints that were taken from Fernandez following his wife's death matched the fingerprints found at the crime scenes. Also in 2011, DNA from Jessica's crime scene matched the unknown suspect's DNA found at Sia and Kimberly's crime scenes. So investigators traveled to Brazil in 2011, hoping to talk to Fernandez, only to learn that he possibly died in a plane crash in late 2005 while flying in a Cessna 310 headed from Brazil to Paraguay. However, Broward County investigators felt that Fernandez may have faked his death and wanted to exhume his body to determine if he was truly dead. Nearly a decade later, in late 2020 and early 2021, the body was exhumed, DNA was collected, and it confirmed the remains were, in fact, Roberto Fernandez. Since the DNA linked him to the murders of Sia, Jessica, and Kimberly, they were able to close their cases. However, investigators believe he may have been an active serial killer and could be responsible for other unsolved murders in South Florida and violent crimes against women in Brazil. Jodine Cerrone was born to Art and Lois Cerrone and went by Jody. Jody suffered from mental disabilities but was able to persevere, and she became very active in several social organizations for the mentally disabled. At the age of 39, she was living alone in a condo on the 1900 block of Swallow Lane in Carlsbad, California. While Jody could live by herself, she did depend on her parents for certain things such as driving her to and from appointments. On Valentine's Day of 2007, her parents went out for dinner and a movie. But Lois couldn't enjoy herself because she kept having an ominous feeling about her daughter. When the movie ended at around 10 p.m., her parents decided they would go by and check on her because she wasn't answering her cell phone. The last time they communicated with her was the night before, and they rarely went an entire day without chatting. When Art and Lois knocked on Jody's front door, they received no answer. The couple attempted to use their spare key to enter the condo, but the chain was on the latch. They noticed that all the lights were on and called her name, but once again received no answer. Art forced the door open as their concern grew, ultimately breaking the lock. As they entered the condo, they went to her bedroom and pushed open the door. It was here that they found a man on top of Jody in her bed. Concerned that the stranger was taking the advantage of his daughter, Jody's father told him to get dressed, and he and his wife quickly went to another part of the condo. They weren't sure at the time if they had interrupted Jody and a possible boyfriend, but her parents waited in the living room to allow their daughter a moment of privacy, expecting an embarrassed couple to emerge from the bedroom. While they waited, they happened to notice a pair of men's shoes sitting inside the door of the condo, as if she had asked someone to take them off. After about 10 minutes had passed and there was still no movement coming from the bedroom, and Lois knocked on Jody's bedroom door. After receiving no answer, they slowly opened it, and to their shock, the man was gone and Jody lay motionless on her bed. Art grabbed Jody, placed her on the floor, and began CPR. But it was too late. She was already cold and was later determined to have died at least 10 hours earlier by blunt force trauma to the head and was strangled to death. An investigation of the crime scene could not uncover the killer's entry or exit point. No windows in the bedroom had been broken or forced open, and there was no sign of forced entry at the door. Despite this, investigators refused to rule out a forced entry. As for an exit point, after Art and Lois left the bedroom, they went to a section of the condo where they couldn't see the bedroom door or the front door, indicating that the killer could have snuck out unnoticed. Nothing appeared to be missing, ruling out a robbery gone wrong. Unknown male DNA was found at the crime scene, but there were no matches in Cody's. But it was sufficient enough to identify someone if they were to ever get a match. A neighbor of Jody, Samantha Raymond, would tell police that she saw a man running down an embankment near her apartment on the night that Jody was murdered, but she didn't get a good description of him. There was a lot of speculation that Jody had willingly opened the door for her killer, implying that it could have been someone she knew. Also, told police that he thought he recognized the man as somebody Jody knew through her circle of disabled friends. He said that if it was this man, he didn't have a car and used public transportation or sometimes rode a bicycle. When the man was identified, he provided a DNA sample, but it didn't match the DNA found at the crime scene and he was ruled out. A decade would go by with little to no suspects. Then, in 2017, Parabon Nanolabs was able to transform the DNA from the crime scene into a digital image of the suspect. This process, known as phenotyping, predicts an unknown suspect's likely description. According to its analysis, the suspect had fair to light skin, green or blue eyes, blonde or brown hair, and some freckles. He was likely in his 30s to 40s and of Northern European descent. In addition, according to Art and Lois, he was a heavy-set man with a large stomach and messy hair. In November 2018, using forensic genealogy, the suspect was finally identified as David Mabriot. However, they were never able to arrest him because he committed suicide in 2011, for years after the murder. Mabriet was a married man with a son who lived a transient lifestyle and had an addiction to meth. He was unwilling to keep a job, lived in and about the area, and had relatives that lived locally. His family never knew of the real monster that was David Mabriet. You can clearly see this in his obituary, where his family speaks of him as a loving and selfless individual and said that he would live on forever in the hearts of those fortunate enough to have had him in their lives. Thankfully, his mother and son cooperated with the investigation. Shockingly, Mabriet had once been a potential suspect in a robbery. During the interrogation, officers asked if they could take his picture and collect his DNA, which he agreed to. He turned out not to be the suspect in the robbery, but his DNA was never entered into Cody's by the Oceanside Police Department. His DNA sat there all this time, and if it had been entered, he could have been caught soon after the murder and could have given Jody justice and her family some much-needed answers. Investigators don't know if Jody and Mabriet knew each other, but they don't believe so. The Sarin family said they were forever grateful to the Carlsbad Police Department for their outstanding efforts in attaining justice in this tragic case. In late 1977, Jane Antunes was a divorced mother of a 13-year-old daughter and was living with her parents in Atascadero, California, while her daughter was living with her father in Oregon. On November 17, 1977, at 7:30 p.m., Jane was on her way to her best friend's home but would never arrive. A witness would later say they saw her pick up an unidentified man in her gold Datsun. The next day, Jane's brother David became concerned when she never arrived home and never made it to her friend's house. Later that day, while searching for Jane, David found his sister in the back seat of her car alongside a dirt road just a mile from her home. She had been bound, sexually assaulted, and suffered a fatal throat wound. Unfortunately, Jane's family had already suffered a tremendous loss in 1965 when Jane's teenage sister died in a car accident. On January 11, 1978, less than 2 months after Jane was found murdered, the body of another woman was discovered only a few miles away from where Jane was found. 28-year-old Patricia Dyer was found murdered on the floor of her home by a friend who came by to visit. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed with a knife from her kitchen drawer. Patricia worked at the Atascadero State Hospital and lived on Del Rio Road. She had told a friend that she was going to the grocery store and then going home to clean. Friends would say that Patricia would have never allowed a stranger into her home, but they said she always kept a key under the mat outside her front door. This is most likely how the killer gained entry. In both murders, the victims' arms had been bound behind their backs with bindings found at the scene. Because of the similarities, the original case investigators suspected the murders were linked. While the victims did not know each other, they had mutual friends, and both were known to frequent the Tally Ho bar in Atascadero. Additionally, Jane's brother knew Patricia through work. Investigators at the time suspected that Arthur Rudy Martinez, a parolee living in the area, could have possibly been involved. Martinez moved to the area in May 1977, 6 months before Jane's murder. He was working in a nearby welding shop after serving time for attempted murder and sexual assault 10 years earlier, but there was never any direct evidence linking him to the crimes. After Patricia's murder, Martinez fled to Spokane, Washington, where he was once again arrested for a string of robberies and 2 sexual assaults. While Martinez was a strong suspect, investigators had little evidence to work with. He was given a life sentence in late 1978, but escaped prison in 1994 and lived under an assumed name in the Fresno area for 20 years. Though the murder cases had stalled, investigators continued to follow leads as DNA technology advanced. They always suspected that Jane and Patricia were murdered by the same person but were unable to confirm this until 2005. That's when the suspect's DNA was entered into a DNA database and confirmed their theory. While they were able to determine that the DNA from both cases matched, they were unable to determine who the actual suspect was because the database returned no matches. Finally, in 2017, a cold case unit detective examined the case once again and used evidence from the crimes to create a familial DNA search. This DNA search would lead them right to a familiar suspect, Arthur Martinez. However, they quickly learned that Martinez had died in 2014, just 2 months after he turned himself in, 20 years after he escaped custody. He only did this because he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and thought he would receive better treatment while incarcerated. But detectives still needed his DNA to prove he was the killer. So they located his ex-girlfriend that he lived with years earlier in Fresno. To the detective's surprise, the ex-girlfriend still possessed an old razor of his that had remained in her medicine cabinet all those years. It still contained Arthur's DNA, and it matched the DNA found at both crime scenes. In addition, investigators once again interviewed a witness who saw a man walking from the scene of Jane's murder. The same witness was instrumental in helping the original investigators develop a sketch of the suspect. The witness wasn't made aware of the DNA match and had been shown numerous photos over the years, but never a photo of Martinez. When she was finally shown a photo of Martinez, she immediately identified him as the man she saw the night of the murder. 41 years later, San Luis Obispo County Sheriff announced publicly in April 2019 that the killer had been identified and he was responsible for the deaths of both Jane Antunes and Patricia Dyer.